I remember just being, like, so many times thinking, like, "I can't do this anymore, like, this has got to, like, end," and I remember feeling that particularly in the middle of one contraction and hearing God's voice breaking through all of that, being like, "This is your last contraction, like, that's going to feel like this," and I was like, "That's really weird, and also I don't know if I believe that."
Mhm.
Like, and then, like, the very next contraction, my body just started pushing.
Hi, I'm Kayla Heater, follower of Jesus, wife and mother of 5 children, Christian childbirth educator and doula, and your host of the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, where we share God centered birth stories, evidence based birth education, and our pursuit of surrendering our birth plans to God. Let's get started. Hey everyone, I hope your week is off to a beautiful start. We had some snow this past week, which was fun, and I'm pretty sure it's the last of it. I mean, you never know, but I'm pretty sure that was it. They of course ramped it all up like it's we're gonna get like 5 to some inches or 3 to 5 inches, which is a lot for around here. And we got less than an inch, but it was still fun. We had a snow day. We made a fire, made some cinnamon rolls, had hot cocoa, all the snowy day things. It was lovely. We watched a movie after they, played in the snow for a while. Pete's Dragon. It was like the, I guess, real life version of that. It was on Disney, came out like 2016, I think. But oh my gosh, in the beginning, it was so sad. His parents died in a car crash and he was abandoned in the forest. And I'm like, I was like sitting there thinking of it as like a parent. I'm like, this is so depressing, so sad. But my kids, I don't know, they liked it. They liked the little boy lived in the forest with the dragon. They thought it was really cool. So, anyways, it has a happier ending, of course, but not before everyone in the village tries to kill the dragon. The village. I mean, it was like set in the 70s, but anyways, okay, I'm like getting way off topic here. Anyways, we had a snow day and it was great. And now we're looking forward to spring weather. I know we're in February, but it's North Carolina and the spring weather is coming. I looked, it's supposed to be in the 60s and sunny all next week. So I'm excited just to be able to be outside easier, not having to put a bunch of coats and scarves and hats and gloves on. We can just like go outside. So I'm super excited about that. I'm also excited. My spring childbirth class is officially full. It is jam packed. We cannot squeeze any more couples into that class, which is bittersweet. I'm like so grateful for that. But at the same time, I've had a few more couples reach out and I can't, get them into the class. But the good news is we are going to be launching our online on demand childbirth class. So, this is my same exact class that I teach in person. It is the same content, same material, same length. It's just we filmed it last summer of me teaching the class live. So, it is the exact same content. It is just going to be online. So you will be able to go through it. You'll have the same handouts. There'll be a PDF that you'll have to print out yourself, but um, same exact notes, same exact resources, all the things. It'll just be an online version. So for those of you who either don't live in the triad of North Carolina and cannot come to the in-person class, or if you didn't make it into the in-person class because it's already filled up, or if your schedule just does not work out to come to the in-person class because you can't do Sunday nights, which is when I teach the class, then this would be the next best option for you. I do always advise people to take an in-person class if they can, because maybe that's just my style, but I learn way better in person than I do online. Just something about like being in the room with other humans and being able to be, hands-on and more interactive. I really enjoy that, but I understand we live in 2025 and that's not always possible. And sometimes people don't even prefer it. So I totally get that. Not everybody not everybody is like me. So that is why we have created this course. My husband is diligently working to finish editing it and getting it up and running but it will be available this spring. We don't have an exact date yet, but this spring for summer, I mean, for summer due dates, but for any due dates after that, it will be available. So if you are wanting to take this class and you're wanting to take the online version for any of the reasons I listed, it will be available soon. So please reach out to me if that's you so I can get you on our list. That I can, notify you first when it's ready. So I do plan on running like a launch special, like a discounted launch special whenever we officially launch it, just to have the first people go through it, which is super exciting. So reach out to me if that's you. And one thing you should note is that when you do take the online class, I will be hosting a monthly Zoom call live for those of you taking the online class if you have any questions you want to ask. So I know a lot of times I could be going through the material and the class, and because it's not like, live in person, you can't ask me your question right then. So if you have questions, just write them down, and then I will do a monthly Zoom call to answer those questions. All right, let's get into this week's episode. Trying to plan a baby around our timeline almost never works out because God's time is not our time, but His time is the best time. Nicki had to trust the sovereignty of God when she became pregnant, not only with her husband being gone for her entire first trimester of all day nausea and vomiting, but also with her husband being deployed during the end of her pregnancy, their baby's birth, and the first 3.5 months of their baby's life. You will be encouraged and lifted up in your faith today as you hear Nicki tell her story and how the best place to be is in the center of God's will. Welcome to another episode of Surrendered Birth Stories. I am your host, Kayla Heater, and I have Nicki back with me today. Nicki was on the podcast in season 1, episode 24. So I highly recommend going back and listening to that episode. But she shared her first story on the podcast in episode 24. And since then, the Lord has blessed her with another child. So we get to hear her second birth story today. And I'm so excited. But for those people who aren't going to go back and listen to the first one right now, Nicki, can you tell us about you, your life, your family, and let us know who is sharing today?
Yeah. Thanks, Kayla. I am now a mom of two. So I've got a 3-year-old little girl, Livy, and I've got a 7-month-old little boy, Rafe. And I am so shocked that we are closer to a year than we are to the day that he was born. It's probably with my first, I felt like the first year of life was like 3 years long, and not in like a terrible way, but it just is like I feel like there's such a slowness when you have one child. I mean, probably depending on circumstances if you're working or whatnot, but I work from home pretty consistently, so just like and you're so dialed in because everything's like, oh my gosh, she moved her finger, like and so I just felt like her first year of life was like this, like time was different, and with Rafe, it's like I feel like we just kind of like threw him in the shopping cart on our way and like we just like he's just along for the ride and it's yeah, man, it's so different. But yeah, he's been here for 7 months already. So yeah, so other than having the two of them, I work from home for a missions organization called Triad, and our focus is reaching unreached people groups with the gospel. So we work a lot with Indigenous partners in the Middle East and Central Asia and North Africa to bring the gospel to people that have never heard it before. So that's really fun, really fulfilling. I do copywriting and kind of donor communication for them. I really like it, except sometimes I don't like working. But if I'm going to work, it's a great job. But yeah, I've really been enjoying that. We live in Southern California right now, which is where I grew up when I was smaller. absolutely loving it. My husband's in the military, and we're just blessed to be stationed out here. We are close to the beach. I am just like living California dream life right now, and I'm telling my husband all the time, "Oh, I never want to leave," and he's like, "I do," because he's like very much not a Californian from like a values standpoint.
Oh, right.
He doesn't like to put up with all the politics and, like, all the things that I'm like, "But the beach and the weather," it's, like, 67 degrees here in January and, like, sunny and,
Wow.
it's amazing. Um, anyway, yeah, so that's kind of us. It's, like, just little family of 4 with a cool dog, and that's it.
Living the dream.
Living the dream, one day at a
Beautiful.
time.
And that's cool about who you work for, that missions organization. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, it's fun to do, like, really fulfilling work. I didn't know until I got involved with them that such a small percentage of missions dollars and missionaries go to people that have never heard the gospel before, so it's, like, really cool emphasis to just think about people that are furthest from the Lord and trying to work to move the needle on that, so
Cool.
I like to tell my other team members I feel like the least important person on the most important team because
Oh,
our whole US team just supports the work that, like, people are doing internationally, so we're
yeah.
just, like, a fundraising and, kind of awareness, like, set of staff members and logistics on the US side, and
Yeah.
everybody else working out of Armenia is, doing all this incredible work, so I just feel honored to be, like, a part of it and, like, get to contribute
Yeah.
in a small way, as a mom of 2 whose focus is very much inside my home right now, it's very cool to have a little outlet to do something meaningful, so
Well, that's beautiful. I love it. Okay. Let's hear this second birth story, starting with the pregnancy and starting with maybe how old Livy was when you got pregnant.
okay.
Was that the plan or was that God's plan?
Always God's plan. It's just like
It's always God's
get
plan.
our say really. So we were in the process of moving in 2023 from Jacksonville, North Carolina, where we were living, to Southern California. And like I said, we are really excited. We have family out here, so we're really excited to make the transition. Um, but he was transitioning out here and moving from a non-deployable job to a deployable job. So we knew there was kind of this deployment looming that was supposed to take place in like June of 2024. And we were kind of feeling like, okay, we're ready to have another kid. And so we were trying to plan it so we could like have the second birth before the deployment happened. So we started trying in May or June of 2023. And with Liv, like we were doing natural family planning and we did like we her conception was just shocking because we were doing like all of the things and like using condoms or abstaining when we were in the ovulation window and like all of the things and still she came. So we were like um and so I just didn't think that we would have any trouble. Like I thought like the very month, especially when you're not dealing with flushing hormones out of your body and like all of that, I just thought the month that we tried we would just like get pregnant like that. And that did not happen. So we tried in May and in June and in July and in August, and I was just starting to be like it was very disheartening every single time like I got a period, and I felt so deeply emotional about it. And I felt at the same time like it just felt almost like I'm being dramatic, like I just felt like it almost wasn't okay for me to feel that upset about it because like I know people that have struggled with fertility on like a very real way and tried for years to conceive or like don't have any children whatsoever and all of that kind of stuff. So I was dealing with this very emotional, very disappointing situation, but at the same time I just felt like I don't have any right to say that I'm sad or that I'm struggling or that I feel frustrated or disappointed with my body because, like, it's not that bad. Like, you tried for 3 months and didn't get pregnant, so what? Like, it can feel, like, very insensitive, but at the same time, like, it was trying to navigate, like, that kind of frustration, disappointment, and then just kinda having this deployment date looming and being like, "Geez, like, our kids would be so far apart, if we waited until after, and, like, there'd be this huge age gap," and all of the details. So we're going through that, and at the same time, we are prepping our house to sell. We are we are packing and moving and, like, all of the things. So there was a lot going on, toward the end of summer. We ended up moving in September, so August was, like, a big month of selling the house and, packing up things and moving across country, and so we got to California in, mid-September. Still wasn't pregnant, and I was just kind of like, we're done. By this point in time, his deployment had gotten moved up twice, so he had gotten moved from June to April, from April to March, and I was just like, we're not doing this anymore. Like, we're just gonna, like, pump the brakes on this. Like, this is clearly not, just not gonna happen right now. And so I was just kind of, like, in process of, like, getting in back into the swing of tracking and this and that, but it's like at the same time everything was up in the air. We are like get moving into our house and stuff, and we found a church out here in California that we started going to, and they have a very just vibrant worship experience at this church, and they very much have a faith-filled for miracles environment every Sunday during worship, which is so beautiful. They will, pray specifically for different types of people amidst worship services and stuff like that. So I was there one Sunday, and I was thinking about all of this, kind of journey that I had been on trying to get pregnant and, all of that. And it was like, past my ovulation window for the month. And I knew, like, trying again would be like at all of this stuff. So I was just processing it. And I was just like, you know what? I was sitting in that service and I said, you know what? If God wanted me to get pregnant, I could get pregnant tomorrow. Like, he can move ovulation windows. He can make crazy things happen. Like, he is sovereign. Like, it just hit me so hard that, like, he is sovereign over all. And if he speaks the word to your body, it happens, like, and I know that sometimes, like, we want the word spoken when the word's not being spoken, and, like, and sometimes there are, like, real barriers in the spirit, that are trying to block God's best for our lives. So there's so much that goes into that, but really there was just this moment of faith that hit me that was just like, you know what? God doesn't need all of this tracking. He doesn't need all of this, like, bells and whistles. Like, if he wanted to be like, you're getting pregnant now, like, he could make it. He could do it, and then so that was kind of where I was at. And then Josh, my husband, he was getting ready to go on a training op for like 2 months. So we got here mid-September. The last week of September, he left, and he didn't get back until 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. So he was just going to be gone for a really, really long time. So he said goodbye, and then I had just been hired at the company that I work for, and I was going out to Parker, Colorado, where their headquarters is, to get training there. And so I flew out there. My sister was watching my toddler. She was almost 3 at the time. She's a November birthday, so she was coming up on 3. This was like early October, and I missed my period when I was out there on and I was like, "Okay." I was like, "I'm not gonna get too, like, excited about this. I've been traveling, like, things have been crazy." So then after, I was out there almost a week, and toward the end of my trip, I was just like, "I'm just gonna take a pregnancy test," and it was positive, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, like, this is absolutely crazy." And it was just such an interesting moment because literally, like, 2 weeks before my missed period, which would have been, like, where ovulation happened, not when it was, like, supposed to happen or whatever, was the Sunday that I had that experience in church. It was, like, September 24th, I believe it was, like, that exact Sunday was, like, 2 weeks prior to when I missed my period, or to when I took the test or something. Anyway, however I backdated it, I was like, wow, right around, within the span of couple, like, a day or 2 there, it was just such a gift of God being like, "I see you." And, like, in that moment in church, I felt like not only did he see me, but he saw me regardless. Like, in that moment, I didn't know, like, when baby number 2 was coming or, even really if. I just knew that if God wanted it, God would. I just had the faith to know that, like, when God wants to give you something, nothing can stop it. And so it was just really beautiful to see the fruition of that. I got back from my trip and started my my first trimester. My pregnancy with Liv was so smooth. I did not get sick at all. I didn't have any issues or anything. Like I maybe was nauseous like twice if I like forgot to eat for a really long time. And this was so different. Oh my gosh, with Rafe, I very quickly got some pretty intense nausea that like lasted all day. I was like working a new job and we were 45 minutes ish, depending on traffic from where my parents lived in Santa Ana. Josh was gone and I just I was like almost completely non functional. like I was sick. I felt like I couldn't be up on my feet. I felt like I couldn't make us food. Like trying to feed my toddler was just like, I had so many food aversions, and sometimes I would get like a craving for something and would eat it, and then like an hour later try to go back to like eat leftovers and be like, I can't ever eat that
Mm.
again as long as I live. I
That
can't
sounds
even
like
think about that
pregnancy.
food. I was like, I will never eat, you know, Korean noodles ever or whatever it was. And so yeah, it was just crazy because I think I had heard people talk about nausea and I just figured it was kind of like, when you have the stomach flu or whatever, but it's like I think eating is such a part of life. And when that goes from being like a joy to being like a little bit of like a traumatic experience, like it changes like your whole world. Like it affects like every moment of every day. And it was so challenging. And I just remember I have this little like almost 3-year old and she's like kind of fending for herself. Like she's like I just had the cupboards full of snacks that like applesauce and stuff that she would just like drag a little stool over there and like get in, like bring me on the couch to open and I would drive into my parents' house whenever possible, and then my mom's a nurse, so on the days that she was off, she really helped, like, if I would drive into Santa Ana, she would help, watch Liv and help her, like, eat regular meals and, like, all the things that I was just like, I couldn't walk past my kitchen without, like, the memory of food making me feel sick, and it was
Mhm.
yeah, I was like, "Man, this is, like" I just have so much more empathy. No, I mean, I figured it wasn't fun before with the way that people talk about it, but now I know. Now I know firsthand. Luckily, that faded, right around the end of the first trimester, so mine was a very typical morning sickness of just, like, as I started to peek into that second trimester, I, turned a corner. Josh, my husband got back like right as I was coming out of that like nausea phase. And it was just like you missed everything terrible. Like it's like yeah, so we went into second trimester and we were deciding on a name, which we ended up with Rafe, Raife, Rafe Logan, for a name. And Rafe actually means God is my healer. And I had suffered a very intense pelvic floor injury because I had a vacuum assist with my first. And so I had a pretty severe pelvic floor injury from that had really tanked a lot of my physical fitness, had tanked a lot of my as somebody that just really enjoys activity, exercise, like I was into CrossFit before my pregnancy and just never able to like get back to that after. And I was really nervous heading into my pregnancy that like having extra pressure on the pelvic floor would kind of just it would make everything really worse. And just is really crazy just to spoil the end of the story, but over the span of my pregnancy things just kept getting better and better with my pelvic floor, which is so crazy. And it's just like even now postpartum it's the best it's ever been since my first pregnancy, like not perfect but so much better. And it just was like really cool that God dropping this name meaning to my husband who just liked the name. He was like, "I just really like this name, and it just means it means God is my healer." And then, in the process of like carrying this child, experiencing a miracle of healing in a place where, something should be affecting you negatively, was really affecting me positively in that way. So that was a huge miracle just within just dealing with so much frustration of not being able to do the things that are like normal things functionally, not being able to do anything, physically intense, and sometimes it got so bad that's like I couldn't walk on uneven surfaces without having bladder leaks, and like it was just it was crazy. And then it was healed. So it's just that was a crazy thing to experience, like while being pregnant. Um, so my husband was deploying in March, and Rafe's due date was no, June. It was June 16th. And so we knew like he wasn't going to be around for the birth. So it was interesting navigating that. Liv's birth had been at a hospital, so we were at Naval Hospital with her, and we had actually transferred. We were we were a transfer story from a birth center in town in Jacksonville, really just due to having a really bad experience day of with the staff at the birth center not being supportive, and all of that, and opted for a hospital transfer, just because we were not treated very well by the staff at the birth center day of. So, and it was a high intervention birth. So, heading into my pregnancy with Rafe, I was really struggling with the decision of what kind of care to seek. I didn't want a high intervention birth. I didn't want one with my daughter, which is why we had chosen to go the birth center route. But then, the way things spiraled, you can check out the whole story in episode 24.
Right, that thing
Um,
spiraled.
it I knew that wasn't what I wanted, again, and I know that, opting for more, holistic based care like home birth or birth centers, like, tends to help those outcomes and, like, limit those interventions. But at the same time, I'd had such a bad experience at the birth center, and it's like with any kind of that kind of midwife care, you can't really opt for somebody else if it's not going right day of. Like, if you're in a hospital, like, a lot of people probably don't know this, but you can fire your nurses and doctors. You can just say, "Get out of here, give me somebody else." Like, and so there was part of me that was like hesitant to seek that kind of care. And we were new to California, we were new to the area, so I didn't know anybody that knew anybody. I didn't have friends that had been like, "Oh, I use this doula," or "I had this, whatever, this midwife," and every state's got different legalities, so it just felt like an overwhelming process to seek that kind of care. My mom actually works at the Naval Hospital that, is our care provider, and so she had recommended a couple of names of people that she was like, "These people are really great." So I would just decided, I'm gonna go to my first appointment at Naval with one of these docs that my mom had recommended, and I'm going to see if I like them, see if it like goes well, we gel, whatever, and we'll go from there. So, my OB's name was Haley, and she just took a lot of time to listen to like my story, the first appointment, how things had gone with Liv, the kinds of things that had gone wrong, due to just like oversights by the hospital, and how that had affected me. Asked a lot of questions, like, she it was probably 15-20 minutes that she spent listening, which was so interesting in
Yeah.
a hospital environment. And I was like, okay, I don't know if she's doing this like as a favor to my mom. Like, I don't, like
Yeah.
I'm probably getting a little bit of special treatment here, but like she really did ask about, details about the previous birth and how that had affected, and all of that. So I was just like, okay, this feels good. We'll go with this unless I feel like something else comes up. It's like just kind of open-handed to the Lord, and really just as I was praying through it, I was just like, God, I don't want to make a decision out of fear. Like, I don't want to choose any kind of care provider because I'm afraid of what's going to happen in a hospital and having another intervention heavy birth, or I'm afraid of like not picking the right midwife and having a bad experience, or so I just like I'm like it really was like a lot of trust in the Lord just to not make a fear-based decision, to make like a faith-based decision. And so I connected well with my OB, and I was just like, we're just gonna stay here. And um, I semi-seriously told everybody that I was having a fake home birth because I I really had set up my house to like with all of the the birthing things.
As
Um,
if you were
just
going to birth
yeah,
there, but you were really just going to
yeah.
labor there.
Yeah, and I was just like, if and then I was like, and if it gets to the point where it's like it's too late to, like we're too far along and we have the baby at home, that's fine. Like I just in my mind I was just like we're gonna be here. So I had things set up, and so I wasn't scared about having a baby at my house, partly because my mom's a labor and delivery nurse. So and partly just I was, I'm a pretty trusting person in general. And then I was just like, but the hospital's like 20 minutes away. So I was just like, we'll just wait until it gets really intense. And then if we feel like we can make it to the hospital, we'll go and we'll see what happens. And
Nice.
in my mental prep, there's, I don't know, just so much of having gone through birth before, just feeling like I now knew kind of the ways in which like I just didn't know how to prepare well. And so one of the things that I really focused on with this birth was that mental space of just like, you know, they say to like picture the space that you're giving birth, or like to think about all your positive memories, like draw them up, really enter into those spaces, get those positive endorphins flowing, and then think about you laboring in your birth space, like picture yourself like walking around, picture, the contractions coming so that when those things that you're picturing in your mind start to happen in real life, you have these like endorphins associated with them. And so
Mhm.
I would do that, I would put my toddler down for bed and I would, like turn on, you know, a worship playlist and I would, walk around my bedroom and the spare bedroom where I was like setting up for laboring and I would sit through and think of memories that I had with family and things that made me feel safe and happy and all of those things and worship music and pray and deep squats and all of that and so yeah that was really my mental prep for labor. Also the deep squats, if you are pregnant and you are looking, it was so helpful, just like hip mobility and keeping that space open, keeping your pelvic floor. Um, Doing CrossFit, I had a lot of pelvic floor strength and not a lot of pelvic floor flexibility, which I think
Mm,
was a huge detriment to my first labor.
yeah.
And so, yeah, definitely focusing on relaxing and opening up those muscles as well as strengthening them was really, really helpful. So, like, I swear by that. Like,
Oh
just
yeah, I tell everyone in my classes like, okay, so from this point forward in your pregnancy, I don't care how pregnant you are, when you go to pick up a toy off the floor, you go to get something like do not lean over, squat. Every
yeah,
time just squat down to pick it up and hang out there for a second if you need to.
when when you're sitting watching TV, be in your squats, be rocking back and forth, like moving
Mhm.
the baby down. Like I just did it all the time, like all the time. And it was honestly the labor went so much better. So I don't know that it was that, but I'm just saying like that was
But that
one of the
didn't
things.
hurt, that's for
It did
sure.
not hurt. So yeah.
Well, okay. So this labor that was so much better. It sounds like once you got past the nausea and everything, which by the way, I completely relate and I'm really sorry that you can now empathize with us, but but now you know.
But now I
Uh,
know.
so when did your husband get deployed and then when did you end up going into labor?
So Josh deployed March 24th and I was due um June 16th. And in my mind, May was for work and June was for baby prep. So in my mind, I was like, all right, I'm trying to get everything ready because we're a small organization. So get everything ready for um maternity leave so that I can take a big break and not leave anybody in a lurch. And so I was really driving hard at like trying to knock out all these tasks, trying to plan ahead for all of our communications needs and everything. And then I was like, "All right, June 1st, I'm switching gears. Like I'm I'm switching mental gear and I was still going to be working up until whenever I went into labor, but I was like, the emphasis is not work. I'm going to be showing up for meetings. I'm going to be like doing last minute things if people need them, but that's not going to be my focus. My focus is going to be spending time with my daughter in our last little, one-on-one season and getting everything fully prepared. I had ordered some stuff for um, birth space and stuff, but I hadn't set everything up yet. I hadn't I hadn't pulled the crib out of the garage yet. So in my mind, I was like, all right, June 1st. It was a Saturday. I was like, June 1st, we are in baby mode. But we didn't really make it to June 1st. So
Oh, no.
May 31st, I woke up and I had an early morning meeting with our team in Armenia. So they're 12 hours ahead. So we always have those at like 6 or 7 in the morning because it's 6 or 7 at night over there. And so I had woken up late because I don't frequently have these meetings. And so Fridays, I typically are not meeting heavy. And so I had woken up at like 6:53 or something like that. And I had a meeting at 7. And I was like, oh no. And so I woke up and I'm like dashing out of bed and I'm like getting Liv and I'm like gonna put a movie on her so I can like have this meeting and whatever. And I am rushing around trying to get her, something to eat and in front of a movie and get my laptop set up and everything. And I have this like what I think is like a bladder leak. And I think like, well, of course I have like this big huge baby sitting on my bladder and I didn't pee first thing when I woke up. So I was like, okay, that happens, whatever. And so I sit through the whole meeting and I'm like noticing like it's more wet than like normal. So finally the meeting's over like an hour and a half later and I go to the bathroom and I'm like, this is not all pee.
Mhm.
But I had my 38-week appointment that day. So I finished up this meeting. The appointment was at like 10 or 10:30 in the morning. And actually my OB had um, asked me to move the appointment from the afternoon to the morning because she was going on a trip and was flying out that evening. And so she asked if I could move the appointment to the morning. I was like, yeah, sure. So I was like, well, I might as well go. It's my 38-week appointment. Like maybe my water broke, whatever. And I just go to the appointment. And by the time I get there, I've like soaked through a pretty decent sized pad. And I'm like, okay, like I think this is, which for somebody wanting to labor at home, I should have skipped the appointment and stayed at home, but I didn't really know what the protocols were because, and so I get there, she sends me up to triage to find out if my water is broken. And they do all of these tests. Like it actually took them a while to confirm, which is weird because there was so much of it, but I guess it wasn't testing on the strip. And so they did another type of test with like a more, I don't know, whatever hospitals. They had the thing. Anyway, and then they were finally like, yeah, your water is broken and we need to admit you.
No.
And
Really?
I know, yes, because at this point, by the time they did all the triage things and had like confirmed that my water was broken, it had broken at like, 6, 7 in the morning and it was like noon. And so their policy, I guess in hospitals is they give you 8 hours from when your water breaks to like come into the hospital. So at that point, I was approaching that 8 hour mark
Wait,
anyway,
even though you're not in labor, even though
even
you're
though
not
you're
having
not in labor,
contractions.
just because now you're an infection risk because
Oh, hospitals. Well,
I
you're
know,
only an
I know.
infection.
And it's
Okay.
like like
You're only an infection risk if people keep sticking their hands up you.
exactly. So
So-
so I was like I thought I knew everything about the hospital and like protocols and stuff like that because I had a hospital birth. And then and then this like out of left field was like I felt like it was like the only thing I did not prepare for in labor is like what happens if your water break and then you have no contractions. Because my labor began with my water breaking and it went straight into like crazy
Contractions.
town contractions, like
Yeah.
just absolute horrendous contractions from the jump. And so I had mentally like even prepared for that. I had thought about, if my water breaks to start my labor again, like this is how I'm going to handle it. This is how I'm going to handle it differently, like all of the all of the things. And then one thing I never thought about was like what if my water breaks and nothing is happening?
Which is normal actually, but
Is
people don't
it?
realize
Okay.
that. Yeah, so we actually just taught this in my class last week cuz it's usually the husband who asks the question like, "But when will her water break or what happens when her water breaks? So, water breaking to start labor usually happens about 20% of the time. So, usually it starts with contractions, but about 20% of the time it starts with water breaking. But it can take up to 24 hours and actually even longer than that for contractions to start. I would say 90% of women will start contracting within 24 hours of their water breaking. Then there's the 10% that it might take 48 to 72 hours before their contractions start. So when hospitals have these policies of like 8 hours, I've heard 6 hours, I've heard 12 hours. And then, almost all hospitals have definitely like a 24-hour policy. It's like, but you haven't even given her body a chance to do what God designed it to do. Like
Mhm. Yeah.
give it that time. That happened with it's funny because I say I'm a statistic because I've had 5 kids and one of my labors started with my water breaking. So
Oh, yeah,
so
20%.
the
Nailed it.
20%. And it took 24 hours before my
Mhm.
contractions started. And I was, calling the midwife. I was at a birth center and I was like, what do I do? And she said, nothing. Like, just relax, go to sleep, hang out. It'll happen.
Okay.
They'll come. It'll be fine. And I was like, really? You're not going to, I don't need to come in? She was
This
like,
is an emergency?
no, no, no. And this was like 6 years ago, but she was like, no, you just hang out, just wait for labor to start. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I am 2 for 2 on water breaking in the beginning. So with completely different results. So anyway, so they admitted me to the hospital and they of course start immediately talking about like all of these interventions. Like we should start
Pitocin.
Pitocin, we should, blah, blah, blah. And it was just like, hold the phone. I was like, first of all, is there a universe in which I just go home right now and don't stay here? And the midwife that was on at the hospital was like, "You have to check yourself out of the hospital against medical advice," which which I later learned can disqualify your insurance from covering the birth. So I'm very thankful that that I didn't do that because you can end up paying a lot of money, I guess. Anyway, but I was just like, okay, well, that, sounds a little extreme, but at the same time, I was very upset about being in the hospital because I was like half planning a home birth. Like, and in my mind,
Yeah.
it's like all of my labor prep was like in my home, like all of the familiarity that I had created and all of the space and everything was just like gone in a moment of just
Yeah.
like, okay, this really sterile hospital room is like where I'm going to be laboring now. That sucks. And it's really interesting because in my transfer from the birth center to the hospital, I there was very little disappointment, which was I feel like partially just the grace of God and partially just very pragmatic of like, okay, like we don't want to seek help from there anymore. So we're going to like go to the hospital. And so but in a lot of ways, that was like it should have been kind of shattering of like, "Oh, this birth that I had dreamed up is not going to happen that way." And I
Yeah.
felt even more so like that with this experience of just like all of that laboring at home, all of that being in my space, like it's just gone now. And there's not really any going back. So that was really jarring. I had Liv, my toddler, with me. My mom was actually working that day, so she was like she was a nurse at the hospital that I was at, and they uh, they had her cover the lunch shift and then let her clock out and be with me. So that was really nice. So we went into the hospital room. I start, just playing with Liv, like crawling around on the floor, like moving around. Everybody's like trying to get me to like
Sit in a bed.
yeah, behave like a hospital patient, I guess, like, but we're just, like we've got the yoga balls on the floor, and she's bouncing on the peanut ball, and I'm sitting on the yoga ball, and we're rolling them back and forth, and I was just trying to keep the experience that I wanted as much as possible, and so, doctor and nurses, like, come in, and we start going over things, and they're telling me all the options that I have to, like, kickstart labor, and, once I figure out that we're like here, I was just like, okay. So they had talked about like inserting a Foley bulb being one of the like least
Least invasive. Yeah.
invasive interventions. So I don't know if you wanna explain to people what that is or if that's, like, common knowledge or, um
Well, it's funny because I feel like everything on this podcast I just assume is common knowledge, but then every once in a while, someone will be like, "I didn't know what that was." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay." Yes, the Foley bulb, sometimes it's called a Foley balloon, sometimes it's called a Cook's catheter. It's basically just where they stick a tube up into your cervix, in which they can only do if your cervix is dilated a little bit. They
Mhm.
can't get it in there if your cervix is shut, but they put it in there and then they fill it up with like a saline solution, and it manually dilates your cervix and is like pressing your cervix open slowly, little by little. And it's supposed to just fall out when it gets to somewhere between 4 and 5 centimeters. That's how it is supposed to work. Some people find them excruciating. Some people don't feel it very much at all. It works for some people and it doesn't work for other people, but it is a less invasive way of dilating your cervix than just jumping straight to Pitocin.
Yeah. So that was one of the options, and I felt like that was probably the best moving forward of, like, not wanting interventions and needing to kickstart labor. So I opted for that. I was like, "Okay, let's do the Foley and just see if we can get things started on their own." And they they went to check me, to do the Foley bulb insertion, and I was already 3.5 centimeters dilated. So they were like, "Well, we can't do that because you're pretty much already dilated however much it would it would dilate you."
Right. It wouldn't
Um,
go much further.
yeah, and so that was actually really encouraging to me because when my water had broken with Liv, the first time I got checked at the birthing center, I had been in like really intense hard labor for like 6 or 8 hours or something with just like gangbuster contractions, and I was not dilated hardly at all. And so that was a very demoralizing experience. Whereas to come in with like zero contractions, they're like, "Oh, you're at a 3.5." I was like, "Sweet." So yeah, so they couldn't do the Foley bulb, so they just did a membrane sweep.
Hmm.
After that, I kinda, like, started cramping, and my dad came and picked up Liv, which honestly, I had always been, like, when I thought about, like, home birth or people and, like, people would be like, "Oh my gosh, like, your kids can be there," and stuff like that. I was like, "I would never want my kid, like, to be in my space when I'm, like, going through that." And I honestly was really sad about her, like, leaving. Like, it just she was so comforting and so distracting to me to just be able to, like, focus on being a mom and, like, doing my job and spending time with her, especially knowing it was, like, our last bit of time. Um, I really I really kinda wish she had been able to stay longer, but then I also didn't want to be like, "Oh," when somebody else is coming to, like, pick up, you kinda just feel like a little bit on their timetable and stuff, so she left kind of right around the time when they were doing, that, and so they did a membrane sweep. I kind of started to get some crampy stuff, and then was walking around the ward in circles, just like again bemoaning the fact that nothing I was doing was like a natural kind of movement. Like I was just thinking, like, if I were home and I was telling my mom, like, if I were home, we could be, like, going for a walk around the neighborhood. We could be going to the park. I'd be, like, squatting down and be picking things up. I'd be, like, doing all these, like, natural body movements that would help my body, like, start labor. Instead, I'm trying to, like, fake my body into, like, starting labor by doing all of these, like, unnatural type of movements to try to simulate like I'm living my life to get the contraction started, and it just felt really disappointing. And, but I was trying to not, like, dwell on that, like, I was like,
Yeah.
that's not gonna we're here, this is the birth we're having, so, um, one of the nurses there was, like, a spinning babies, like, guru, and so
Oh,
she was like
cool.
so she actually I don't even really know which I don't even really remember my first nurse at the hospital because this other nurse didn't really have a patient at the time, and so she came over to help with, like, all the spinning babies things, so she had all of these movements that she was having me do, and she said, "Sometimes if they're just not quite in the right position, they're not your contractions won't start or whatever." So she spent a lot of time with me, just putting me through putting me through the motions, trying to get labor started, and then right as kind of we were finishing up some of that stuff, It was like shift change. So it's now like 7 p.m. I'm getting a new nurse. They're getting, and so at that point in time, I was starting to get some contractions, but they were like 10, 12 minutes apart. And they were strengthening, but they were still pretty spaced out. And so then we have shift change, and honestly, it just kind of took me out of like birth mental space into like now I'm introducing myself to a new nurse, and we're like I'm telling her, this is the plan, this is where we're at, these are the kind of interventions we're avoiding, like all of the things. So contractions kind of started to back down a little bit again, and then they um at 8 o'clock the doctor comes in. She's like, she wants to do a check to see, because she knows that I'm experiencing some contractions, but it's not really ramping up that much, and so she wants to see if it's like dilating me or if it's not dilating. And so I was like, so this is like right around 8 p.m. and I was like, okay, we did a check, and I think I was at like 4 maybe, and so it's like, so she was just like, "All right, our recommendation is that you start on Pitocin and all of that." And I was like, with my first birth, I had gotten an epidural and it had really tanked my labor progress, like absolutely, like, and then they had to crank the Pitocin up so high after the epidural to get things moving again. It was just crazy. So So I was like very much like, I am not getting an epidural because I don't want to go through that whole process of slowing down labor that much and having to artificially like restart it. So I knew that if I started Pitocin, I wasn't going to have an epidural. And I had I had heard really bad things about Pitocin contractions. Like I obviously had them, but I didn't really like fully experience them when
Feel
I
them.
was had an
Yeah.
epidural. So I was like, all right, if I choose Pitocin, it's gonna be tough and there's gonna be no help for it. So um I so the doctor left the room and I was like, I need a minute to think about it. And I was really grateful my mom was there because she was like, you can tell them no. You can tell them to give you another 4 hours to get things started on your own. Like you don't have to let them do what they're suggesting that they need to do. And I was like really grateful to just have somebody tell you, like remind you. Like you know that in the back of your head, but you just kind of feel like, I don't know. It wasn't even like a pressure for me. It was just kind of like is this inevitable? Is giving me another like 4 hours really gonna, or are they just gonna be frustrated because like, it comes around midnight and we're just like at a 4.5 and now we gotta start Pitocin anyway. We called the doctor back in. I was like, I want another 4 hours. And I was like, and I want everybody out of the room. Like I don't want anybody in here. And we had been doing intermittent fetal monitoring the whole time, so I wasn't attached to like an IV. I just had a port, and in my mind, I had gone through all of these. Uh, I'd done all of this stuff to prepare for an intervention-free hospital birth, and so I had looked into intermittent fetal monitoring and just like having an IV port and not being connected to an IV and like all of the things. And I think I thought that that was going to make a bigger difference than it did, if that makes sense. So intermittent fetal monitoring, they put you on the monitor for 20 minutes every hour. So you have 40 minutes of time to like labor on your own without being connected to monitors. And that just goes by really quick when you're in labor. So it just feels like all the time it's like back on the monitors. And then the monitors, like theoretically, you can still move around as long as you're kind of close to where the monitor is connected. You can sit on a birth ball, but what they don't tell you is that the monitors slide around a lot. And that if they don't get a consistent 20-minute reading on the heartbeat because you're moving around, then you have to be on the monitor longer so that they can get that consistent reading. And so it really was like, there are tricks. There are absolutely tricks if you want to have like an intervention free hospital birth, but they're not the same as not having hospital protocols. Um, so yeah, so I told everybody for this 40 minutes, like I don't want anybody in here. I just want to be well, I didn't kick my mom out, but she just kind of sat on the couch and didn't do anything. And I turned on my playlist and I just started doing some like the deep squat kind of motions and everything and just praying. And I was just like, God, regardless of whether the way that labor started is some sort of like spiritual attack on what kind of birth like I was preparing for, or whether it's just the way that you planned it to be and the way that you've orchestrated things. I'm like, regardless, like you are in control. You're sovereign about the way that this baby comes into the world, and you know what's best for him. You know what's best for me. You know what I want. You know what I need, and I need you to be the one that decides when and how this baby's coming. Your hand is ultimately bringing him into the world. So, literally during that 40 minutes, contractions, like, really really kicked in, and, which was just such a huge blessing, and I think it was just a combination of physical things and, spiritual things, like, a combination of faith and divine intervention, and also just having the lights low and having all the strangers out and, like, all all of the things, and being able to, like, move on my own and do what felt good to my body. And, like, almost the whole time I had been checked into the hospital up until that point, I'd been, like, doing some spinning baby stuff and, like, all of that, which I really appreciated their, like, help and attention and expertise, even that they had taken, obviously, supplemental education courses to be able to help women, whose babies weren't in the right position. So, like, all of that totally appreciated, but it wasn't the same as just, like, being on my own and taking the time to really listen to, like, what kind of movements my body needed, not what kind of movements my body maybe needed, like,
Mhm.
to get the baby in the right position. And, yeah, so contractions kicked in probably around, like, 9 p.m., and, they kicked in they picked up pretty quick. We were we were off to the races at that point, and, things started to get really intense and painful. And I was like, it's still to this day, I have a goal for labor to, like, have those low, like, moans that you're supposed to have in labor that, like, help your body continue to, like, open up and all the things. And, it was not like that. Those were not the sounds I was making. And
What sounds were you making?
I was making some, like, shouting sounds, some, like, some real intense, I do not wanna be doing this. And I just remember, like, it was, oh my gosh, my contractions were so close together, they were so intense, and I was just like, with Liv, they had been close together and intense for, like, hours and hours and hours, and I wasn't dilating, and I knew that we were in a different spot with, this one. But at the same time, I was just like, this is like, in my mind, this was gonna go on forever. Like, this this is
Because
never
that's how it did for her.
this is
Yeah.
never going to end. And it was just like, and I didn't want any sort of, like, pain meds or anything like that. So I was just like white knuckling it through all these contractions. And I have to say, my night nurse was like, oh my gosh, I would hire her as a doula for every subsequent birth if I could. She was incredible. She just was like the best combination of, like, firm and kind. And, she ended up being a believer, which was such a blessing because, at some point she was just like, do you want me to turn your worship music back up, or, like, you know, different stuff. And she just was, yeah, I mean, she was there, like, holding my hand, like, the whole time. So having her and my mom there was just I could not have made it through without them. And there were times that I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And she would just be like, look at me, look at me. Yes, you can. You are doing this. Like, and just some of those, like, kind of encouragements were just, it was just getting through minute by minute. So they ended up offering, I don't know, sometimes they call it gas and air, or, like, I don't
Mhm.
remember
The
what else
nitrous
they call,
oxide,
yeah.
yeah.
So to, like, take the edge off, which, like, I don't know if it just kept getting more painful and it actually did take the edge off, or if it, like, I don't know if it worked, or if
Or
it was
if it
like,
didn't work at
oh, or,
all.
like,
Yeah.
whatever, or if it didn't work. But I remember the first time she put the, like, mask up to your face, like, you have it fully, like, enclosed, and you're supposed to, like, take a deep breath. I had, like, a panic moment of, like, this has gotta be off my, like, you're in pain and, like, all this kind of stuff. And I just was like, I threw it and I was like, I can't breathe. And I was, like, panicking. And she just, like, picked it up. She put it, like, back on my face. She was like, you can do this. It will help. Take a deep breath. And, so I used that a little bit, towards the end. And, yeah, I don't know. I know that they started picking up around 9 o'clock. And I know that he was born June 1st at 12:57. But I don't know how long the contractions were super, super intense and how long, like, you're just it's a different time. Like,
Yeah.
it's Twilight Zone for sure. So, I don't really know how long we were in those, like, super intense contractions. I do remember laboring for a while and doing really well at breathing through contractions and stuff like that. But there got to a point where I just was really struggling to breathe through things. And so I was on my hands and knees with my arms like draped over the back of the bed. I kept trying to get into a squatting position between contractions, but I think at that point it had just been too like I didn't think to do that early enough, and it just was like I I just every time I started to like move at that point, it would like trigger like
A
a really
contraction.
contraction. So it's like I couldn't ever get both my feet up under me to get into a squatting position. But I was like kneeling with my like knees apart on the bed. And I remember just being like so many times thinking like I can't do this anymore. Like this has got to like end. And I remember feeling that particularly in the middle of one contraction and hearing God's voice breaking through all of that, being like, this is your last contraction, like that's going to feel like this. And I was like, that's really weird. And also, I don't know if I believe that.
Mhm.
Like, and then, like, the very next contraction, my body just started pushing. And that was such a cool thing to experience because being on an epidural, you don't get to experience that. You're artificially pushing. Your body may or may not be ready to push. It was just cool that like nobody had to green light it. Nobody had to be like, all right, you're 10 centimeters, like here we
Yeah.
go. Like nobody had to be like, all right, this is how you do it. It's just like, it was so cool. And I to this day will tell people I feel like for my first birth, it felt like an experience that something it felt like something that happened to me,
Mhm.
and my second birth, it felt like something that I did or accomplished, like, it felt like I was the active, not the passive
Yeah.
participant in the experience, and so that was just really cool. It felt so much better to be pushing, after all of those contractions, like, it just I'm sure it was still painful, but if it's like a totally different kind of pain, and you really like, I mean, at least for me, just there's not any like, all right, here comes another contraction. We're gonna push. It's just like your uterus just pushes your baby out. And
Mhm.
so it was only I don't even know how many contractions or how many I like, but it was very, very he came very, very quickly after. I remember my nurse being like, are you pushing? When I first started and just like not being able to like respond. And then I was like facing the back of the bed and I was like, I don't know if the doctor's here. I don't know if the doctor's coming, but like
But the
there's
baby
nothing to
is.
train. The baby is coming. So at Naval Hospital, they have midwives that oversee what do they call those? Like the non-risky births.
Low risk.
Yeah, the low risk birth, and so I was low risk birth, and so I had a midwife, like, overseeing who did actually make it to the birth, but I didn't know that until she was, like, handing the baby, like, through my legs, and, I just pulled him up in front of me, and I was like, like, it was such an interesting moment, I don't know what I expected it to feel like, but it just was like I just was like, "That's so weird," like, "Here you are," like, and it just was like, there were so and I think especially because I was turned around and especially because Liv was a vacuum assist, there were, like, 87 people in the room when she was, like, delivered, and it was just, like I mean, she literally was, like, kind of pulled out of me, and then, like, I was just like, "Oh, here," and I pushed for probably, like, 45 minutes or something with her too, and so it was like this she came out, and I was like, "Oh, finally, my baby is here." Like, when he was, like, handed up to me, I was just like, "What? I can't believe you're here." Like, it just I mean, literally from contractions picking up at 9, it was less than 4 hours between that
Of, like,
and
real active
being there.
labor.
Yeah, like, of
Yeah.
real active labor, and so he came very quickly, um, and, after he was born, the OB, as she was, like, coming in to do all the, like, stitching me up and, like, all that, she said, "My entire career, I have wanted to, like, hand a baby to a mama like that up, like, through their legs," and just she was like, "It was such a beautiful, like, primal moment," getting to witness that and see just, like, you pull him up into your arms and, like, how natural it was and, like, all of the things, and I just was it was just such a weird moment for like, I it was like it just, I guess, was crazy, and she later even told me, she was like, "I was so proud of you for choosing to take another 4 hours to see what your body could do." And it was crazy because I was just like, "Well, I wish you woulda told me that," you know? Like,
Yeah.
I wish that you had told me that you were, like, shipping for me to, like, ignore what you were telling me to do,
Like, why
Like,
did you
I
tell
was
me
like,
that in
"'Cause
the
I
first
almost
place?
didn't," but it just, like, it was such an eye-opening experience for me to know that, like, care providers have to say certain things on behalf of the hospital for, like, like, protecting the institution kind of purposes, and it just,
Mhm.
like, interesting to know that, like, you can have this, like, closet crunchy midwife who is, like, secretly shipping for you to, like, ignore her advice and, like, let your body do what it needs to do, but also is, like, maybe not allowed to en
Tell you that
encourage
directly.
those things or, like, tell you that directly, so that was, like, I mean, it was really kind of like a special thing to know that, like, somebody had a very, like, kind of career-making moment, like, during the birth, like, that was kind of cool, like, to know that that she really doesn't often get to experience because of her context that she's working in, like, that kind of birth. And the
Yeah.
same thing for my nurse, like, she doesn't get to do a lot of, like, people that wanna have an intervention-free labor, and, so it was just a cool experience because I felt like everybody got to participate in something really cool, like, everybody, and my mom even said around the hospital that they were talking about it for, like, days of just like, "Oh my gosh, we had this, like, mom that did this intervention-free birth," and, like, all that kind of stuff, so it was just really kinda cool to know that, like, behind the scenes, like, there's a lot of, like, or can be a lot of, like, celebration going on. I think that we often hear hospital stories about nurses getting annoyed with moms that wanna have intervention-free births. It's just cool to know that for all of the stories about a doctor getting impatient and just wanting you to, like, get it over with and wanting you to push on their terms and their schedules, or nurses that are annoyed with moms that are, like, making a fuss, trying to, like, go without interventions, that there are people that actually it's a really meaningful experience for them as well. And, people that are willing to support you and just, yeah, really, really champion you. It was an amazing experience. And, again, you could have anybody on when you have a hospital birth. And so I'm just really thankful that when I went into labor, I had the nurses and stuff that I did. I did have significant tearing with him. For like my mom was like, it was I had a flayed labia and then several more tears around where I had torn before, like repeat tears, which is pretty common. But and then it was a lot of stitches. Your endorphins kind of like make you forget how bad labor was. But I remember feeling like this is the most painful part, even though I knew it wasn't. But they had a hard time getting bleeding to stop. So they had to do like clot sweeps. That was excruciating because I
Mm.
was just very torn up down there. And I had to, do a lot of things to try to get bleeding to stop. And so I did end up getting a Pitocin shot um, after birth, which was like, I don't remember like having super intense like contractions or anything like that. I just remember the whole like clot sweeping and stitching was like super, super painful. And I remember, the midwife stitching me up was just like, I've numbed it like a lot. Like I can't like, can you still feel this? And me being like, yeah. And she's like, I mean, it's like the same stuff they do for like dental procedures and stuff. I was like, it doesn't work at the dentist either. Like I
Oh,
doesn't really like, yeah, local anesthetic is not very, it doesn't affect me the way that I
it's
think is
supposed
supposed
to.
to or whatever. But anyway, so that sucked, but it was
Mm.
fine. And then of course the hospital stay is like not it's not anybody's dream, like you hang around for 48 hours for people to like poke and prod you and baby and nobody gets any sleep and all of that. But it was really it was a really cool experience to have, and it worked out in so many ways that I was really thankful for, just because coming in and not knowing if I was gonna be able to get labor started on my own, things really did come together in the end. And One of the things that I had consistently prayed for was that my labor would be 6 hours or less. And
Oh,
I got what I prayed for. It would definitely
check.
yeah, I was like, "Man, I need to start praying for more specific things," because, like, that worked, but just, like, yeah, every time I thought about it, I was just like, "I wanted 6 hours or less in labor," and, yeah, 4 hours of real active labor, and little boy was here, and 16 days early.
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah, he was born 7 pounds, 15 ounces, so he was a pretty big boy for not big boys like your big boys, but
Right. But for 38 weeks,
for a
yeah.
38-week boy, he was a little chunk, so, yeah.
I mean, that's probably what my baby would weigh at 38 weeks. Mine just never come that early.
I was shocked that mine did. I mean, I not truly shocked. I was unprepared for sure. My daughter came at 40 and 4 or 40 and 3, something like that. So
Mhm.
she was just over her due date. I mean, in my mind, I'm like, she's pretty much a due date baby because like
Yeah.
you never know like precisely and whatnot. So it was like she came on time. And then he was just charging out. Um I had had a friend who was actually a coworker at my job whose wife was due on the 6th, and I had a really good friend in Florida whose wife was due on the 10th, and all of the babies were born within 24 hours of one another. So I was like,
Oh.
it's like I don't know if that's like the moon or like or like what, but yeah, we had like just like the whole work chat, and then the whole friends chat was like popping off with like the baby's here and the baby's here and guess what? The baby's here. So yeah, it was a little flood of babies.
That's so fun. And then you'll always have that to be able to track, like, oh, now my baby's one, and now my baby's two, and all.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's so cool. Well, as we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to share? I know that on the last episode, you gave advice and wisdom and told us what God taught you and all of that. But did you have anything else to share from this experience in that way?
Yeah. Postpartum experience was obviously like really different. Just Josh being gone, and
Right. When did he get back?
so he got back September. So yeah, so Rafe was about 3.5 months when Josh got home. I mean, it's a whole different world. I feel like being military because like these kind of things are just like realities in that like yes, they're hard, but they're also like pretty pretty routine inside this particular context. And outside of this particular context, it feels like, oh my gosh, like people like have a really hard time wrapping their mind around that. But like within it, it's like, that's like you can't schedule every baby around somebody's deployment or schedule everybody's deployment around their babies and stuff. So there was just so much grace over the entire deployment process. Like it went so much better than it had any right to. And I really just feel like that was a lot of just like, I have never believed in the power of small prayers like I experienced in that season because I know there were so many people that were just praying for me, not in these like intensely long intercession sessions, but just like throughout their day, we're just being like, God, help her, bless them, and I felt the impact of those prayers throughout the whole deployment experience. And that was just really special to me because like I think as a mom, wherever we were at in our faith before becoming a mom, like if we were, like following the Lord really closely before, there can be this sense of loss of that time to have that like those longer prayer sessions and those like big intimacy moments with the Lord. And with kids, it's just so much moment by moment that you can feel like, does this even count? Like, does this even does this even matter? Like, am I completely neglecting my faith and the Lord and everything because there's so much that just needs your attention so much of the time, so much of your waking and sometimes sleeping moments. So I think it really just demonstrated to me that when we say those little prayers for friends and family members, like as we go throughout our day, like they count just as much. And I was listening to a pastor, and the way that he described it was like when the widow came to give her offering in the temple, even though it was the smallest offering, Jesus said it was the most significant because she gave out of her lack, out of her poverty. And I think being a parent, like your spiritual life often is giving out of lack, like we are often the widow with, 4 minutes in between when we sit down with our Bible and when our kid needs something, or the 2.5 minutes between when we lay down and when we fall asleep at night. And like just thinking that those offerings are so significant to the Lord that he said that her gift was greater than everybody else. And I think as a mom, that's like a really encouraging thought to me. And just experiencing deployment and knowing that I had a bunch of people that were, saying those small prayers and knowing that it went so smooth. Like it's not God's will for families to like have a lot of distance apart, like on an ordinary thing, but it's just like when God calls you to something, he gives you grace and he strengthens you. And it was just, yeah, way smoother than it had any right to be. And I'm just so thankful for the power of prayer. Um, and it's helpful, I think, and I hope it helps somebody listening to this to just believe that when you've said, God, heal that person's XYZ and just moved on with your day, that prayer is not insignificant, and yeah, so I felt like I really learned that. I think having two kids or more probably postpartum is just really different. I felt like it was kind of like a magical season with my first. Like I would just like go to like rock her to sleep and spend her entire nap just like staring at her cute little face. And I'm like, I'm not a person that like sits still very often. So I was just like amazed that something could be so mesmerizing that I would spend an hour and a half just like looking at her tiny features and stuff like that. And it just felt so like I don't know, like Christmas magic, like
Yeah.
all of the vibes and everything like that with her. And with him it was not, it was like it was solo parenting a toddler and a newborn and trying to figure out how to get everybody fed and trying to put two kids down for bed at night at the same time and one or the other or both is crying like and it just was there was so much and I really struggled with just being okay with having a different experience. Like I know so many people that had talked about like the the newborn like fog or haze and I could not relate. Like I just was my first time was just so hyper aware of things and so very present with all of the developments. And this time there was not a lot of space for that. And it was a challenge. But it was even something that just recently, as in probably a month ago, that I was able to really surrender to the Lord and just, I felt like I have the most contented second child ever. Like my dad literally asked when he was like 2.5 months old, like he cried or kind of fussed or like made a noise. And my dad walked around the corner from the kitchen into the living room and he was like, was that him? He's like, I've never heard him cry like that. Like I've never like he just was very mellow, very content. And I again so blessed to like have that experience with everything going on. But I felt guilty in the background that he was having such a different experience and that sometimes he would be crying and I couldn't get to him, and I just and then I would think like people would always compliment like, "Oh, he's just so content. He's just so." And I was like and in the back of my mind there was like this, yeah, that's because he's used to like not needs met. Yeah, like like I just like in my mind it was just not
Not in an intentionally
yeah.
neglectful way,
Yeah, but
just
just
in
like
a,
I was
like,
just
I
like
also have a toddler
I
way.
just I just felt like I just felt like that's because he doesn't get picked up every time he cries, like, and, but I felt like I had a moment with the Lord where he was just like, "Nikki, the way that his life began was so on purpose." And, like, I know the beginning from the end. Like, I know exactly the skills and the tool belt that he's gonna need for the rest of his life, And I designed the beginning of his life on purpose. Like, I knew that your spouse was going to be deployed. I knew like the kinds of things that you were and were not going to have capacity for. Like you're not in control, and that's okay. And it just was like, it was a humbling thing to just be like, God, the whole birth story just beginning with like, God says when. I never ever would have chosen to have a baby while my husband was deployed. I never would have picked that timeline. But the Lord did.
Yeah.
He picked that timeline. And because of that, I had a lot of peace, and I had a lot of peace in the midst of people were like, "Oh, how are you going to do birth, without your husband and everything like that?" And I was like, if God wanted it different, he'd have done it different. Like he had plenty of chances to like not have this timeline, but this is the timeline that we have. So I know it's on purpose, and I know that it's going to be great. So I think that there's so much that we want to control as parents, and then we want to control as moms. And if the timeline you're experiencing is happening, it's because the Lord had a hand in it. And if the Lord had a hand in it, you can be confident that he's going to provide all of your needs according to his riches and glory. And that's beyond what we think that we could need. And even if it seems hard, I think we have a choice mentally to say, I know that I'm in the center of the Lord's will. And I know that because I'm in the center of the Lord's will, he provides. Or we have a choice to worry and to second guess, like I did postpartum, and fill our thoughts with anxiety instead of faith, and or guilt, and there's just so much peace when we push those things away intentionally, and we just choose to say that the Lord has decided, like he is sovereign, and he's brought me to this place, and he's not going to withdraw his hand of provision once he's brought me out here. And you see the Israelites struggling with that in the desert over and over again. Like the sovereign hand of the Lord delivered them through miracles into this place, and they go, what about this? What about this? What about this? And it's like, you know, we're, you know, every time we have a baby, it's a miracle from the Lord, and it's like, so he draws us into this place, and then we go, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so I would just say, just trust in the sovereign hand of the Lord and the way that he's guiding your life, and that his blessings will follow his guidance. And when we step where he's having us to step, there is more than enough, everything we need to sustain us.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Again, I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. I've been so blessed by the ministry of your podcast and all of the advice and encouragement. It was a staple for me when I was prepping to have Rafe, and I just appreciate all of the work that you put into it. And I hope that the blessings are returned to you abundantly for everything that you pour out into the birth space.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can reach me at Surrendered Birth Services on Instagram, or email me at contact@surrenderedbirthservices.com. Be sure not to miss an episode by hitting the follow button. Also, we'd love for you to leave a written review of the show so that more people's births and lives can be changed by the love of Jesus and the empowerment of accurate birth education. If you really enjoyed this episode in particular, please take a screenshot of it and post it to your Instagram story, tagging Surrendered Birth Services. If you would like to be a guest on the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, please click the link in the episode show notes to fill out your interest form. Also, if you're interested in taking my childbirth classes, birth consultations, or having me as your birth doula, please click on the link in the show notes to take you to my website for online and in-person options. Just as a reminder, this show is not giving medical advice, so please continue to see your personal care provider as needs arise. We hope you have a great week, and remember, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands.
My toddler's telling everybody that she's getting a baby sister, and there is, as of yet, no physical manifestation of that, and I'm honestly a little bit nervous because we'd like to have a little bit more of a gap, but, who knows?
Who knows?
If
Oh,
the
man,
Lord
that
calls you into that, he will provide.